From psychiatrist to cannibal, mummy's boy to slasher in the shower, Jedi to Sith Lord, kiddie killer to dream demon. No matter how iconic the villain, everyone has to start somewhere. Whether it's the beloved TV series Hannibal, the smart Saw 3, or the, intriguing Prometheus, there is no denying a place in horror history for the prequel. Letting us get to know our heroes and villains better, a good one can show how certain elements came to fall into place and enrich both the franchise and its heritage. In other cases, however, it is simply a way for studios and filmmakers to wring a little bit of extra cash out of a character they foolishly killed too early in the series, or wrote into a corner. And as is the case with these next 10 movies, we'll learn that some stories might be better left untold. I am the origin story of Ash from What Culture, and these are the 10 worst horror prequels ever made. 10. Cabin Fever Patient Zero. Directors always seem to think they can crack out a solid follow-up to a horror movie that is famed for being somewhat schlocky. Cabin Fever itself is not a masterpiece by any standard, but its original premise and playful approach to genre work has given it firm B-movie bragging rights and has a gory appreciation for low-budget movies that paved the path before it. Cabin Fever Patient Zero, however, can boast of none of these things. Released a good decade after the first movie to tell a needless story, it is a splatterfest with nothing much else behind it, and would probably get away with being bad all on its own if you strip away the Cabin Fever title card and let it have its fun with scarring sex scenes and gory catfights. One redeeming factor is Sean Astin, because he can do no wrong. The rest, however, is as sickly as the flesh-eating virus that ceaselessly ravages everyone throughout, and just as incurable considering there is 4 movies under the banner. 9. The Nun. The Nun takes all the goodness of the films that have come before it and absolutely wrings itself dry trying to manufacture some worthwhile scares. It simply dishes out predictable, trite, and just downright boring horror movie tropes with each rolling minute of its runtime, offering up nothing worthwhile to the giant franchise thanks to the absence of James Wan. Please come back, Wan. We miss you. Travelling back to the 50s to explore Valak the Demon Nun, an imposing force that has appeared in almost all of the Conjuring universe movies, the Nun is largely formulaic and lacking in any sort of logic. Considering the great groundwork that was laid for something both interesting and a little out there to take place, it was all the more disappointing and needless for it to be this bad. Especially when films in the franchise like Annabelle Creation have managed to take the prequel mantle and run with it far more impressively. 8. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. If Platinum Dunes' Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake felt pointless, then this prequel is even doubly so, tacking on a half-baked Leatherface origin story to the thing the filmmakers actually wanted. More screen time for Sheriff Hoyt. Hoyt and the Hewitt family return in a story which explains elements of the family legacy nobody ever really cared about in the first place. How Hoyt came by his sheriff's badge, why Leatherface wears the leather face, and what is with the whole cannibalism deal. Like its predecessor, it is gory, cruel, and slickly produced. Too slick to be a Texas Chainsaw flick, really, considering the film's whole premise and origins, but its narrative dead end makes it impossible for the audience to care. Still, at the very, very least, it is not as bad as Texas Chainsaw 3D or The Next Generation. A shudder just ran down my spine. 7. Wrong Turn 6: Last Resort. The franchise that kept on going far longer than anyone ever expected it could, and long after they killed off all of the original inbred family of Wrong Turn 1, 2, and 3, prequel territory saw the brothers emerge from an old abandoned lunatic asylum in Wrong Turn 4, while the 5th installment added a horrible Doug Bradley, who is better known as Pinhead, to the mix. Last Resort is the least memorable of the films to date, taking place at an old hotel out in the middle of nowhere where a young man comes to claim his mysterious inheritance. Tedious, oversexed nonsense, and that is really saying something considering the franchise's standards, it bears little relation to any of the other films to date and remains, wait for it, a last resort for those seeking their backwoods horror fix. 6. The Thing 2011. There are many things about The Thing which make it such a classic. John Carpenter's masterful direction, Kurt Russell's beard, Keith David, the fantastic use of special effects, the sense of paranoia and claustrophobia. But unfortunately, barely any of this is represented in 2011's half remake, half prequel, which replicates the setting, alien and visuals, but forgets any of the personality. The quasi-remake element sees the same story rehashed again, a persistent lack of invention leaving it unable to make make its own mark, like individual itty-bitty snowflakes recently fallen amidst an Antarctic tundra. Worst of all, it utterly waste stars Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Joel Edgerton, where you'd be far better off watching 10 Cloverfield Lane and The Gift for their excellent horror credentials. It is not a terrible movie by any standards, but it is the dirt worst thing a Thing prequel could do by veering away from Carpenter's wonderful framework. 5. Annabelle. Like Annabelle herself, the film is inert and lacking personality, suffering from James Wan's absence from the director's chair. Like many haunted doll movies, it seems too content to let its porcelain star's terrifying visage do all of the heavy lifting, with little characterization afforded to anyone else. No sign of Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson's ghost-hunting Warrens either, depriving this prequel of the best thing aside from James Wan about the whole franchise. 4. Exorcist: The Beginning. No, not that one. Here we're talking about the prequel to The Exorcist, which was born out of fear that the other prequel to The Exorcist, literally called Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, wasn't much cop, and had Rennie Harlin make his own version instead, which in turn wasn't much cop, and wound up being far worse than the first version. The Beginning sees Father Merrin traveling to East Africa, where he encounters Demon Pazuzu, who will later come to start messing everything and everyone up in The Exorcist. In spite of the best efforts of Stellan Skarsgård, The Beginning is dull studio fare, demystifying Merrin, Pazuzu, and so much of what worked in The Exorcist in the process. Dominion is just a little bit better, but neither should have been made in the first place. 3. Amityville II: The Possession. Of course, horror fans always want more Amityville stories. I mean, think about how great all of the 23 named entries have been so far. Each one is a new adventure, each one is critically lauded, each one a mesmerizing ghost story that warrants further exploration. Wait, sorry, I've got the wrong notes here. The Amityville series is just it's something very bad. There's 23 films, yes, 23 films with Amityville in the title, and only one, the first, that manages to be anywhere near bearable. It should really come as no surprise that Amityville II: The Possession in particular has made its way onto this list then. But it is somewhat nice to know I could make a fat new rundown solely dedicated to the Amityville spin-offs as a whole, eh? It's just bad. It's really, really bad. Please take my word for it. And perhaps most criminally of all for a prequel, it manages to undo the logic of the first movie, almost flouting a big old incestual relationship running down the middle. Because if you're going to be terrible, you might as well do it properly. Bad. 2. Halloween 2007. Part remake, part prequel, but mostly the latter. Establishing his cult horror credentials in large part with the brutal, cruel, and sweary hillbilly 'em up with The Devil's Rejects, preceded by the more fun House of a Thousand Corpses, Rob Zombie stepped up to the big leagues with his remake of slasher classic Halloween. What, we wondered, would Rob Zombie do with Halloween and Michael Myers? What magic could be served up? As it turned out, he simply copied and pasted his already established sensibilities onto the existing template, turning Halloween into a brutal, cruel, and sweary hillbilly 'em up. Gone is Michael Myers the Shape, Lovecraftian force of nature and terrorizer of babysitters, replaced with grunting, furious Michael Myers the Bulk, tearing Ken Faree to bits and stealing his overalls. Michael isn't the only character butchered by his zombification either, turning Laurie Strode into an unmemorable nobody and Loomis into an unlikable dullard via a phoned-in performance from a clearly bored Malcolm McDowell. This Halloween, you will wish he'd never bothered coming home. 1. Hannibal Rising. Finally, the prequel nobody wanted. Not even the man who wrote it. Forced into writing a Hannibal Lecter prequel by producer Dino De Laurentiis, and I quote, "If you don't do the prequel, I will do it with somebody else," Thomas Harris hashed out the unfortunate Hannibal Rising, which details the early days and upbringing of Hannibal the Cannibal. Making the best of a bad lot, the story has Hannibal hunting the war criminals who ate his sister, learning to become a samurai, yes really, and of course developing a taste for human flesh. By far and away the worst of the Hannibal Lecter movies, this prequel is saddled with an atrocious Hannibal, a bad Rhys Evans performance, and an even worse script. It demystifies the horror icon to the point where we never want to see his face ever again. Thankfully though, eventually we would in Brian Fuller's Hannibal instead, which not only managed to make its prequel status work, but also the bare, flesh-rendered bones of Hannibal Rising too. That was the delectable Hannibal we deserved in all of its small screen glory. Not this! Never this.